late to go for the set date for my trial. They kept giving me set date after set date after set date. They would set a set date simply to set another set date. This game went on for many months. I had to keep taking time off work for these phony set dates only to be given yet another set date. One time I asked, why was I getting another set date? And the judge said, we never set dates on a Friday. Meanwhile, my new set date was also set for a Friday. Always was the threat that if I didn't show up each time, I would be charged. What was that harassment about? The judge came very close to having a complaint filed against her with the Law Society of Upper Canada. When my lawyer, Brenda Nichols, had her first meeting with the Crown Attorney, she was offered a plea bargain. I had filed a complaint against P.C. Benton. The Crown Attorney offered that if I dropped the complaint, the charges would be dropped against me. This confused my lawyer, as the two things are not supposed to have anything to do with each other, but whatever, this was the offer on the table, so under my lawyer's insistence, and against my better judgment, I dropped the complaint. After that, the Crown, represented now by a different lawyer, said that the first lawyer had no right in offering such a bargain and refused to hold up their end of the deal, excusing it by saying that the first lawyer for the Crown was young and inexperienced. I had been coerced into dropping the complaint against the police officer. Once a complaint has been dropped, it can't be reinstated. I would not be at all surprised to find that some arrangements had been met between the police officer and the first Crown Attorney. During this time, I was working in a career as a freelance graphic designer. The stress and anger from this incident and the lost work from all the bogus dates affected my career so badly that I lost all of my clients and freelance agents. I had learned I had learned that there was the possibility of 4 years in prison because the alleged attack was against police property, the car. An attack such as that against police property always get higher sentences. No one had kicked the police car, though, or anything else. This was all made up by some of the cops who were trying to cover up for a mistake. Road rage made by one of their own. I was completely innocent. I had learned that the cop, P.C. Alan Benton, 3773, had a perfect record and as such had a high position and allegedly taught classes at the police academy in Aylmer. I'm not sure if the teaching part was true, but I did hear that somewhere. He had a huge reputation to protect and was doing his utmost to protect it no matter how badly he hurt me. He knew he was in the wrong for hitting me with his car, and it might have affected his career badly. I can't help but wonder, though, which is worse, hitting me and owning up to it, or what he actually did. I can tell you that if he had owned up to it at that time, I would have forgiven him. Everybody makes mistakes. It's his inability to own up to it that caused so much harm to me, and why you're reading this now, 14 years later. P.C. Benton's partner was P.C. Denise Williamson, 4648, no longer with the force. She kept herself uninvolved from the proceedings, but she didn't try to bring any real justice either. She just let P.C. Benton do whatever he wanted and hardly said a word herself. This makes her guilty by way of her non-action. I became depressed and filled with despair. I was naive, I guess. I could not believe that something so horrible could happen to someone who was so completely innocent. This is Canada after all, and I was raised to believe that Canada is the best country in the world, and to know how lucky I was to have been born here. And that the police are there to do good by helping good people. And now I was horrified to find out the truth. I couldn't help but think about the innocent people who were rotting in prisons around the world and worse, right here in Canada. I felt unified with them and my heart went out to all of them. I felt betrayed by all I believed to be good in this world, and I wanted to die. I could not live in a world where such terrible things happened to innocent people. What I didn't realize was that I had developed a severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder. I was traumatized by the experience, disillusionment that an organization that I had been raised to believe in as good and to always be respected had been found to be so corrupt as to be willing to send an innocent person to jail simply to cover up for the poor judgment of one of its own officers. That was too much for me to deal with, along with the simple injustice of it all. I was innocent of all this that was happening to me. How dare they press charges against me? I didn't do anything wrong. I now understand why so many people mistrust the police, and I totally see how such behavior from the few make the jobs of the many so much more difficult. Since that time, I don't trust any Toronto police officer at all, and I consider them all to be corrupt. I feel safer that way. At least that way, I'm not placing trust in someone who could potentially not be trustworthy. And if they are trustworthy, well, too bad, so sad. I've no way of telling them apart. Best to simply assume them all to be corrupt. I'm sure all of their jobs would be way easier if more people trusted them. But it's easy to see why so many don't. This trauma had me so angry about injustice that I became a very angry person. I would yell at anyone for the slightest injustice. Store clerks, waiters, people blocking escalators, and even my clients, bosses, and freelance agents. No one was exempt from my PTSD-induced wrath. As you can see, this made it very difficult to keep employment or even friends and relationships. This made me so financially poor that I ended up sleeping on sidewalks and in parks. You know, the cold ground takes all the heat from your body and chills you right to the bone, even in the heat of summer. My entire life fell to pieces as a result of the actions of Officer Benton. The anger, however, was the only thing that kept me going and kept me from killing myself. It gave me a purpose, and I was vigilant in it. It became a mask for the deeper despair that I had from it all, including the embarrassment and shame of poverty. I remember the trial of João Rollo, where we had a dozen witnesses as to his innocence. But the police brought in a few witnesses who strangely no one even remembered as having been there at the time. They all gave identical stories of João's guilt, and the judge chose to believe the cops over the witnesses. This was a judge with a reputation for always siding with the police no matter what the circumstances. He was clearly biased in placing his sentence against João. He said that João was guilty of preventing motorists from their right of driving their cars. That's not a right, it's a privilege. After that joke of a trial, I was even angrier than before because I was even more terrified than before. Later, João Rollo won an appeal with a different judge. However, the entire experience cost him a lot too. He no longer resides in Canada, having returned to his native Portugal. When my own trial came, my brother and father drove down from Collingwood to show support for me. When we arrived outside the courtroom of Old City Hall, there were 6 uniformed Toronto police officers waiting there to be witnesses. Funny, there were only 2 cops in the car that hit me and 2 more in a second car which showed up after my arrest. But 6 here as witnesses? That's pretty funny. The other officers were Detective James McCrell, 909, PC Paul Van Cedars, 2439, PC Philip Chung, 4096, and PC Adelio Alamag, 89. None of these four were present at the time of the incident or my arrest. However, the last 2, Chung and Alamag, are credited with my arrest along with PC Benton. I assume that they're the officers who were in the second car which arrived after I was already arrested. PC Van Cedars is credited as the investigator. I think that means that he played the role of bad cop, but I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that none of these cops were there at the time, and yet here they were all as witnesses. I have no idea who this Detective McCrell was, or what role he had in it, if any at all. About 5 minutes before the doors to the courtroom opened, my lawyer Brenda came up to me with great news. She had informed the Crown Attorney that if they did not go with the original plea bargain, that we would be pressing criminal charges against the Crown for improper procedure. The Crown had, under this new light, decided to allow the plea bargain as originally offered, and the mischief charge was going to be dropped, under the provision that I agreed to plead guilty to the lesser traffic offense of failure to stop. Stop for what? There was nothing to stop for. We were in the middle of the block. The charge was completely made up too, but okay. I did just that. The judge, however, put the fine for the traffic offense up to $500, and then I had to pay another court fee on top of that. I was pretty angry about that. After all I'd already lost, and all it had already cost me, to have to pay such a large fine and fee too. I attempted to contact Officer Benton about a week after the court date. I wanted to talk to him about what he did to me and see if I could get him to apologize. Instead, I barely got a few words out of my mouth, and he told me that if I contacted him again, he would make my life very difficult. A threat. Considering how he was so able to twist what had happened and press false charges against me, I felt that the only thing that I could trust about him was his ability to manipulate the law in his favor and make anything up in order to protect himself. Officer Benton is a deceitful, intimidating liar, and nothing can be put past him. He cannot be trusted. This was one of the reasons why I never bothered to do anything about this for so long. I was afraid of him. The other reason was the PTSD itself. I was so messed up that I was incapable of attempting to bring these cops to justice. After that time, I spent 8 years, 1998 to 2006, and close to $20,000 in therapy. I was incapable of holding down any sort of a job at all during that time. My skills as a graphic designer became very obsolete, and I have too much trauma around any of that to ever work in that field again. I'm in need of complete retraining in a new field. Now that I'm over the PTSD and able to think straight about it without anger or despair, I'm now not qualified for any sort of work. I'm working right now as an artist figure model, but that can't be forever. It's only seasonal. So there is no money in it to re-educate myself in a new career. I've spent the last 4 years trying to move ahead with my life, but I have no skills to move ahead with. So far as I've been able to find out, the statute of limitations of 5 years on this, and I'm way over that time. Considering that I was left psychologically unable to deal with this issue for all of these years, and the threat I was under from Officer Benton, I don't believe that this statute is fair. It should be overlooked in my case, in the same way that rape victims are able to sue private schools and the Catholic Church often as much as 50 years after the fact. I've come to serious harm as a result of this incident and was prevented from getting the justice I deserve. I have only recently come to understand that I had the right to sue and to no longer be afraid of Officer Benton's threats, so I could speak out and tell my story. I am also aware that with proof of psychological conditions having been what prevented me from pursuing justice within the legal time frame, that the statute can be overlooked. Alan Benton and the other officers who were willing to cover up for him acted in a very unprofessional manner, which has put the reputation of the Toronto Police Services in jeopardy. To the end of attempting to seek justice, I've sent letters to politicians on all 3 levels of government, and they inform me that they are unable to do anything as they are not allowed to get involved in legal claims. I've sent letters to the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, but have been informed that they're not allowed to look into anything that happened before they came into existence. I've contacted the Ombudsman of all 3 levels of government, and they are incapable of dealing with it. I've contacted many lawyers, and none of them are willing to even listen to me. They simply tell me that I'm past the legal time I can file a claim in and won't listen to me when I tell them that the law does include a loophole for those who can prove that they were too psychologically messed up to deal with it within the time frame. But still, none of them will listen. I can prove it, too. I've sent letters to each of the officers involved and all of their superiors, and I've not received a reply from any of them. I've contacted the Toronto Police Services regarding this issue and requested a meeting with Police Chief William Blair, but as of April 7, 2010, that request has been met with refusal from Sergeant Chris Blackman, 4207, who insists that I'm only allowed to proceed according to due process through the legal system at my expense, even though I'm innocent of all charges and have been forced into poverty by this issue. How wonderfully convenient for them. It's unfair that I should be prevented from seeking justice because of my financial hardship, especially when my financial hardship is the fault of the defendants, the Toronto Police and Officer Benton. Furthermore, I really don't feel that the police have the right to any requirement of process or procedure after what they did to me. I would like to sue for $1 million damages, but so far I've been unable to get anyone to listen to me in any way. My life was destroyed, and I deserve compensation. To this end, I'm now making my story public. Alan Benton is now Sergeant in Forensic Identification Services. James McCrell is now Staff Sergeant at 41 Division. Philip Chung is now Detective with the Fraud Squad. Adelio Alamag is still a Police Constable with 52 Division. Paul Van Cedars is still a Police Constable with 52 Division. And Denise Williamson is no longer with the Toronto Police Services, and I've been unable to locate her. Thank you very much for listening.